Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Monday, June 6, 2022. This is episode 579 of Living Free in Tennessee. And today we're going to talk about a question that has been up in my mind for a while. And that is, what are you prepping for? What are you preparing for? We talk about prepping all the time. And then we get like over the rainbow on this topic. So I was sitting in the garden and I just sort of started thinking about this. So we're going to be recording this one live. Hopefully we'll get some input from the audience, y'all. If you're on the YouTube channel, I finally, I don't know how it happened. I made it to the point where I'm able to officially monetize the channel. So I'm kind of playing with some of those tools. Give me feedback on how that is. I'm trying not to be too advertising. So I have like things at the beginning. I have skippable ads so you don't have to watch them. And we turned on super chats. So we'll see how that go. And hello, Julia, Corey, Wild Blue Whippets. Welcome to the podcast recording of Monday. This is a Monday show. These are fun to do. Before I jump into our usual segments, I do want to have a couple of announcements. One, there's a single chicken processing workshop seat left. I miscounted. I said there were 2 last week. There were 3, sold 2. 1 ticket left, $95, livingfreeintennessee.com. July 2nd, we'll be processing chickens. You come, you process your chicken, you eat lunch, you finish processing your chicken if you haven't, and then you take your chicken home. And you will also go home with a chicken processing manual that you will not be referring to in the class because that's just gross. But after the class, when you look at the manual, it's actually kind of helpful to kind of see the different ways. And then the June webinar for members will be how to start an event, where I'm going to go through the basics of the process we go through when we are starting a brand new event and planning it and some of those things. A lot of you want to learn from my mistakes. So we're going to put that together in a webinar. And of course, if you're on the live webinar, you can ask questions. Yes, Mona, you made it to the beginning. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show. With that, it's time for our first segment, and that is Tales from the Prepper Pantry. This is where we talk about storing what you use, using what you store. Seems like a simple enough concept. In fact, I did a webinar in our member portal on how to get your pantry going. And it's like Pantry 101. And I asked a friend, like, hey, here's my outline. What do you think? He's like, I think I already do that, so it seems simple to me. And it is simple. But when you've never done it before, it's less simple. And so I understand that. Anybody who has questions about pantry, just like shoot them to me, Nicole at livingfreeintennessee.com. Anyway, here's what's up in the Prepper Pantry. Hey, man, thanks for the super chat, Michael. You are my first super chat. You have broken my super chat super chat cherry fairy. That was kind of a funny little Freudian slip there. Anyway, thank you for that. $5. Woohoo! Anyway, a first round of canning has happened for the season. So we eat seasonally, and that means we fill the pantry seasonally. This time of year, we've switched over to filling it up from using it up. I'm still using up things like salsas and tomato sauces from last year because we don't have ripe tomatoes from the garden. I am able to buy some ripe tomatoes from the farmer's market, but I don't do too much of that because pretty soon the wall of tomatoes that is outside my window will end up with lots of tomatoes. And we love eating those fresh tomatoes from the vine. They're like so much better than anything from the store. But meanwhile, the farmers who got their stuff together sooner than I did this year have some tomatoes already. But what we're pickling, and it's almost always this first, it's beets. Beets are coming out of the ground. The farmer's market where I go, they're like, how many beets are you going to buy this year, Nicole? I'm like, as many as last year. Like multiple bushels of beets get pickled here because I serve them all the time. I serve them at events. I like to eat them. And so I'm pickling my first 7 jars. We hope it's 7. We guessed. I would have actually bought more, but Self-Reliance Festival is next weekend, and there's no way I could commit to a whole weekend of canning when I knew that I had to get ready for the Self-Reliance Festival. So even now, I'm kind of like, I still haven't done them. I've half done them, so they're going to be done soon. And that means first 7 jars are into the pantry. We are testing freeze-dried beet greens. So I got the beets with the beet greens on them, and I used some in sautés this week. But I'm also freeze drying the greens. I'm going to reconstitute. In fact, the freeze dryer just finished it, so I'm going to reconstitute some tonight. from freeze dried, saute those and see like frozen greens reconstituted in the saute is okay, but it's not as good as fresh. I'm going to see if there's a difference with the freeze dried. I will share those results with you probably next Monday. I just want to know if the mouthfeel is right, guys, because if it is, that's like a whole new world for me. Like winter, like fresh spring greens in the winter, that'd be so awesome. Not grown inside, that'd be awesome. So the freezer that I store, I have 2 freezers for pork. One of the freezers has a door closing problem, as it turns out. And I went out one night. I double check all my freezers. I have alarms in them. I'm like, is it all good? It's all good. And the door didn't close all the way. It had a little teeny gap. And modern day freezers don't keep trying to keep cold so they don't break themselves. So I came out the next morning and was doing something in that room. And I heard beep, beep, beep. Freezer had defrosted. Now, what that meant is the stuff inside the freezer in certain areas were still frozen, and other areas were defrosted, but still cold. So it hadn't gone bad. And I pulled everything that was defrosted out of the freeze and either turned it into sausage or cured it for bacon. Okay. And then I packaged it all back up. The bacon's actually still curing, put it back in the freezer. And the next day, the door had come open again. Now, here's a lesson. I tell everybody, get your freezer alarm, get the one that'll give you a notification. I have one. I have a probe in that freezer. The battery is dead. So I'm telling you this story. I did not lose all the meat. I cannot sell this pork, though. If I have pork for sale, it's not coming from that freezer. So I have a freezer full of, like a whole chest freezer full of pork that only I or people around me can eat because I don't want to risk it. It's defrosted twice. Which is, I mean, like from a food safety standpoint, because it didn't get below 30 or above 34 degrees, it's technically okay, but I'm not going to risk that in a sale thing, which is a bummer because I was going to sell some of this pork. Now, my other freezer has pork in it I can sell. But if you have a freezer alarm or a freezer sensor, check the batteries. I don't know which one of you needs to hear this right now, but one of you needs to hear this. And if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't have a freezer alarm, they cost between $26 and $100 depending on the kind you get. I prefer the kind that not only do alarms but give notifications. Those are more expensive. I don't have any one brand loyalty. Somebody else might. I'm still trying them out. I have different ones. Buy it. Because that $100 insurance policy for $1,000 worth of meat is worth it. I know that times are tough, but it's tougher if you lose $1,000 worth of meat. I'm really lucky. I was out there 2 days in a row because I'm not always out there 2 days in a row where the long-term meat storage is. And I would have been really pissed after spending a whole weekend processing those pigs if I had lost that meat. And right now I'm pissed because I can't sell that meat. So just telling you, I don't know which one of you needs to hear that. Check your batteries or buy the freezer sensor. That's my stern warning for today. That said, I've got 50 pounds of bacon curing in the fridge. And when I get back from Self-Reliance Festival, because it'll be too warm to cold smoke it, I'm just gonna put it back in the fridge unsmoked and in the freezer unsmoked. And you can eat the cured bacon unsmoked. It's better tasting smoked. If I want the smoky flavor, I'll slice it up and actually just cook it in the smoker until we get there. Yeah, Corey says we've lost 2 freezers full of meat. It sucks. We need to get alarms for sure. Exactly. Alarms. It's like when you buy the freezer, you just add the $100 for the alarm and you're good to go. And you can actually get a system that will go into one app in your phone. And I'm looking at upgrading to that. I will totally share my journey as we do that. I've got lots of breakfast sausage that we're pulling into, like the bacon and the sausage is now in there and my canning kitchen's all set up. Woohoo! So that's outside. And it took me a while to set this up because after the LFTN spring workshop, there was just a lot of stuff from the workshop that we only bring out once a year there. And I had it there undercover where the outdoor kitchen is so that I could organize what was going to Self-Reliance Festival, what's going away for the year, and all of that stuff. And yeah, Mona, it's a whole bunch of extra work heading into the Self-Reliance Festival to I think I'll cure 50 pounds of bacon. But it's done. That's all put away for the year. And then we have Self-Reliance Festival stuff ready to load up into the car this week. And I was able to set up the kitchen, and a mom was here. And for me, it's actually when I'm spatially setting something up, I do better if I have somebody there to run ideas by. So we've got it set up so we can do the canning, smoking in a way that the smoke goes away from the house, boiling in a way that the heat goes away from the house, and then another prep table behind. And then there's also room for my rowing machine for my workout area. So it all works, and I still have room to park my car under the carport because that's where it is. That's all good to go. And that is a huge savings for me because when I can inside, it puts all that humidity and all that heat in the house, and then I air condition it out. When I can outside, it's just hot, and I don't care because it's just hot. It's not like I'm standing there over it, babysitting it the whole time, right? I run it and I check in periodically to make sure that the pressure doesn't fall, and then that is what it is. So that's what's going on in the pantry. We're going to be doing a big redesign of the shelving right after Self-Reliance Festival. Tactical's been trying to talk me into this for like 2 years, and he finally did. So we're going to get that done, and a shelving system behind the kitchen for workshop stuff. And then all of my workshop supplies are going to be in one place, because right now I have it in two outbuilding areas, and it's a big pain. It's like, which thing is where? That's never fun. So if you're going to run workshops, by the way, put all your stuff in one storage building if you can. It makes it way more efficient. I just didn't have the flexibility for that at this time. Next segment is the frugal tip of the week. If you have a frugal tip you want to send and for consideration, definitely shoot it to me. And you can send that to my email, Nicole@Living Free in Tennessee, or go to livingfreeintennessee.com and click on contact notes, fill out the form. Those come to me directly. The frugal tip this week is how to never buy bone broth ever again as long as you live if you eat whole animals. Here's what you do. Cook as normal. When you have that pork chop with the bone, you take the bone, you put it in a Ziploc baggie, you put that in your freezer. If you have chickens, you put it in that Ziploc baggie of bones in your freezer. And when that baggie gets full, make bone broth. The way I make bone broth, I don't even roast it because at that point it's pre-cooked bones. I put that in my pressure cooker. I add an onion, always add an onion. And then I add other things that I have, whatever I have, vegetable ends, carrots, carrot greens, celery, whatever. Throw it all in there. I pressure cook it for 45 minutes, let it cool so I can open it again. Pressure cook it a second time for 45 minutes. And then I pour that out onto the stove and can it. So I bring it to a boil and then pressure can it for 25 minutes per quart. And because I have an electric canner now and I can do 4 quarts at a time, that process works really well. That same canner is what I'm pressure cooking in. So I can run through about a gallon, little over a gallon of bone broth, get it canned, have a little bit left over for use that week, and then I have 4 quarts. If you do this, and if you do this on the regular with all the bones you have, and you're somebody who does whole animals, you're not just buying like boneless, skinless chicken breasts, you'll never buy bone broth again. And if you want to get really studious about it, you can have a Ziploc for pork and a Ziploc for beef and a Ziploc for chicken, whatever. I do multi-broth. I occasionally, like when I get a cow, I'll do all the cow bones at once. Or when I get a deer, I'll do all the deer bones. Yes, I do venison bone broth. It's tasty. Don't let anybody tell you that's not tasty. It's totally tasty as long as those bones haven't been sitting around rotting, in which case that's rotten and that's gross. Yep. So that's the frugal tip of the week. Saves you from having to buy bone broth at the store. And it's very easy to build into your system as long as you have time to boil things. You could also boil it on your stovetop, by the way, low simmer for an hour or two or a day or two, depending on how long you want to go. You can put it in your crock pot. When I have a big bunch of bones, I'll do it in my roaster, my turkey roaster oven. So those are some other ways to do it if you don't have a pressure cooker. And they all work great. They all work great. And it's way tastier than the stuff you get at the store. You use salt that to taste, by the way. You're going to add a lot of salt at the end of the process. Next, I wanted to add a segment because I've been reading these and enjoying these on our MeWe group, the Living Free in Tennessee MeWe group. And it's somebody named Joe, who I won't give you more information on unless he emails me and says I can, who does a weekly shopping report. And he started this maybe a year ago as we were looking at inflation and shortages. It might have been 2 years ago. I love reading this thing. It's really, really awesome. Boyd, I'm starring your question for later. I'll have that at the end. We'll do a Q&A after the podcast is done. So Joe does a weekly shopping report, and then when he puts it up, it's usually on the weekend, he goes over to the MeWe chat on our Living Free in Tennessee group and says, hey, the shopping report's up. And this week, as I was reading it, I was thinking, I've actually learned a lot from these, because he prices the same things week after week after week, and he kind of tells you the state of shopping in his area week after week after week. And if you read them every week, you start getting a sense of what's really going on, which means you panic less. And panicking less is what we're going to be talking about today later in the show. So here is his update. I took out any geographical references just to preserve his privacy. Joe, I didn't even ask your permission. I just assumed it was okay for me to read this since it's on a public forum. And if you want me to give you a different kind of credit, like, I don't know, drive people to your website, let me know, because I'd like to start doing these once a week. So weekly shopping report for 6/4/2022. The weather should be reasonable all weekend, but warmer tomorrow than today. So off we went, made 4 stops. The first stop was Dollar Tree. They have no more mackerel, and he buys mackerel every time he sees it pretty much. We saw a few other second choice options, but the only thing I got there was a cold drink. Second was Home Depot. The price of a 2x4 has dropped further to $5.48. Guys, these were as high as $11, right? $11. Thanks, Boyd, for the like. On these shopping reports, it's back down to $5.48. That's not a terrible thing. If you need 2x4s to build something with, we're starting to get down to a reasonable range. Ryobi Days is still ongoing. So if you have any interest in their 18-volt 1+ line, now's the time. My wife and I have many of these tools. None of them have let us down. The savings in the batteries is great right now. We found a 40-pound bag of birdseed and a 60-pound bag of blacktop patch that we needed. Third was Aldi. A few prices have dropped. English muffins are $1.29. Oh, we're $1.29 and dropped to $1.15. Bacon was $4.35. It's down to $4.29. Eggs were $2.26. They're down to $2.21. Pork prices were unchanged. So I got a couple of loins for the freezer. I will can what is in the freezer tomorrow. We found everything we wanted. The final stop was Food City for cat food. They had a decent amount of Friskies cans and a good amount of various baggable kibble. Overall, stock levels looked good in all of the stores with no glaring holes. Untainted regular has jumped, though, to $4.69.9 a gallon. That's up 14 cents from a week ago. And I'm just going to start reading these, and we can, talk about them back and forth, all, based on your impressions as well. It's kind of cool how he documents this week over week. And this week things dropped, things were in stock, and gas went way up. And since this came out, gas has gone up another 20 cents in my market. So that's it, because his is $4.69. Mine was up to $4.39 on the same day, because every market's different. I've been using that Gas Buddy app, and the way I use it is I run it while I'm driving, and I'll just look from time to time to get a range. And then I know when I'm on my way back from somewhere if I want to gas up where it is, because I'm always choosing. I'm not going to go an extra like 50 blocks to save 2 cents on gas, right? But it helps me understand what the range is. And sometimes my favorite, like, reasonably priced gas stations that go through volume so that I know the gas is probably good, sometimes they're like 30 cents higher all of a sudden, and they used to be consistently at, a reasonable price. So it's been interesting watching how those prices are rising, because it's a rolling thing. Next segment is Operation Independence, where we talk about building ongoing local revenue here at the Holler Homestead. And we talk about doing things that make sense to avoid having to pay a guy. A lot of our focus this year, guys, is really about how much food can we produce for ourselves here without a bunch of external inputs, but we need external inputs. Like, we just bought 5 bales of Timothy grass hay today for the sheep, because it was a shock to their system to be on different pasture from where they were. And so we're trying to balance that out with the Timothy grass. So far, they've been responding well since the issue we had last week. And in hindsight, I realized what I needed to do was buy hay from that local area, bring it in, and titrate them onto our pasture. So that is a huge lesson I have learned about bringing new ruminants into our property. I've never brought ruminants in from out of state before, it's always been sort of local. So they were already sort of acclimated to what we have here. But they're doing great. But that means that I'm buying expensive, like the most expensive hay from the most expensive source in the area. I'm not buying it straight from the farmer because I don't know who the farmer is, but it's Timothy grass, which I know they've been eating. And I bring it out once a day and they're like, woo, it's Timothy grass time. But we do have the chicken processing workshop actually helps us achieve that goal because people pay for classes. We spend a lot of time putting it together and building the manual and printing those and cooking the food and all of that. But for that investment in time, we do get some money back to offset the costs of electricity and feed and buying the chicks and all of those things. So it kind of brings down our quote unquote per bird price of raising meat birds here. And this is a big one. I've talked about it over the years. On July 1, we will be launching podcast sponsorships. No, it will not be annoying. It will not interrupt the podcast in the middle of the podcast. I'm going to start out with 1 per show, and then I will build to 2 per show, and there will never be more than 2 per show because my job here is to help you get a real view into what our life is like, share with you my journey of building my life the way I choose so that you can build your life the way you choose. And if we're all commercials all the time, that would actually suck. So we're not going to do that. And I don't even like midway commercials in the podcast. I know that happens on YouTube. It does not happen on the audio podcast at livingfreeintennessee.com. And if you're coming to me through YouTube, this is also an audio podcast. You can get it at livingfreeintennessee.com or go to your podcatcher, and it's also on the podcatcher. Anyway, so those are some steps we're taking. It's been a hard year financially here because I let go of one of my business units that was profitable, but not where my heart is. And I was like, I really like the coffee. I really like the podcast. I really like doing events and training people. I love all of that stuff. And if I'm doing this other thing, then I can't do the things I love. I can't coach people one-on-one. I can't do any of that because this other thing takes the time and I don't love it, but it pays well. And so I had to make that hard decision. Like, am I ready to jump? And I was ready to jump. And now we're all in on the podcast, on the coffee, on the coaching, on the events. And I'm loving it. I mean, like in 1 week, I will be in Camden, Tennessee for Self-Reliance Festival. We sold more tickets. Like I'm sold out of online tickets. At this point, the only way you get in is at the door. And we're going to have a great time. And things are like really lining up well for this event from an organizational standpoint, wherein, 2 months ago, I was really worried. Now I've got a great team around me helping me make this happen. And I'm really thankful they're there. With that, it is time for the main topic of today's show. What are you prepping for? What are you prepping for? A lot of you who listen to my show are preppers. Some of you are not. But a lot of you have come here through the prepper world, which is a surprise to me because I never thought of myself as a prepper. And then I realized one day I was a prepper. In fact, I told that story. I can't remember why. Like, how did I realize I was a prepper? It was probably when I was talking with Xavier Hawk last week. I was just in here. I had moved to a homestead. I raised chickens. I grew food. I was canning my food. I didn't like going to the grocery store because it's a long drive. And so I had already gotten down to where once a month I know how to shop. And I needed to can tomatoes, and I'd been listening to the podcasts from the Cato Institute. They're about 15 minutes long, which is probably set up by them so people can listen to it on their commute. Well, when you're canning tomatoes, your hands get nasty for about 45 minutes. And I didn't want to have to wash my hands and hit play for the next one. And I hadn't figured out how to make this phone device thingy automatically go to the next one. And so it would just stop. And then I'd be like, okay, my hands are messy. I got to hit play again. So I started looking what podcasts are available. And I found this podcast by a guy named Jack Spirko called the Survival Podcast. And he was talking about wild edible plants. And I had already been collecting mushrooms and things. And so I went and I listened to that. And I was like, whoa. And I listened to another episode. This is pretty good. And I listened to another episode. And I'm like, oh, shoot, I'm a prepper. I didn't know I was a prepper. I just thought that was the normal way to live. And that's what we're talking about today. What are you preparing for? This is one of that's like the first question you should be asking yourself when you decide you want to be a little bit more prepared for things. Is what am I preparing for? Is it rumors of shortages? Normal things happen that happen in your area. Is it that? Is it zombies? Is it nuclear war? Is it an economic collapse? What is that thing you have in mind when you decide I need to be more prepared? This weekend, as I told you kind of in the introduction, I was just sitting in my garden doing my daily 30. And the daily 30 is 30 minutes after the sun has come off the garden, so it's in the shade and not as hot. And I go through and I'm weeding basically half a row because my rows are 4 feet wide. And I'm kind of cultivating plants at that time. What that does is it lets me look at the plants every day and I can see that we have a nutrient deficiency, which I've told you about. It's getting better, but I see the change every day. And I was just sitting there. It was quiet. I wasn't playing a podcast or anything. And I was like, what are you preparing for? Like, I was up there looking at things. There was like places that were no germination had happened. And I'm like, what the actual? And then there were places where the plants were doing really well. And I was like, I could react to this. I really could. In fear, because I need to grow all my own food. And in this spot of this row, nothing germinated. And I don't know why yet. I kind of do know why. But it was just funny because I didn't feel fear. I just started saying, some people would freak out right now if this was their first year growing vegetables and they're expecting to live off the food they grow. And they hadn't asked themselves the question, what am I preparing for? This could really freak them out. And I was just seeing some plants that looked sad. I was seeing the blank places where the germination hadn't happened, which is a big deal, but not that big a deal. And I was thinking, I can look at those places and I can worry. Or I can look at the other places in my garden, which are the places where the tomato is flourishing, the beans are up, and they're looking good. The places where things are going well, and ask myself, why are things doing well there? And how can I make that happen over here? That second approach, how can I replicate the good in the bad spots? It's going to get me a lot further than looking at that blank spot and thinking, squash, why didn't you germinate? Because really this year, my squash kind of didn't germinate very well. I've already taken some meaningful action in that regard. And this year in Tennessee, we are in a drought. There's been lots of rain. We had lots of rain all at once early in the spring and then nothing. And so we have a drought situation. And that means that the water's not wicking throughout my garden very well. And when I water it, it kind of ekes the plants along, but they don't do that great because what happens is the moisture wicks out into the other dry ground around my garden. And I also have not cultivated that garden for 5 years, and the soil is not in the best shape right now. So it's not just kind of holding water there. It's letting it go for sure. And it's just all a little out of balance. And so I'm looking at the spots where it's good and I'm looking at the spots where it's bad. And I'm like, what can I do to the bad spot to make it more like the good spot? And I'm looking at the soil and it's like nice and black and awesome in the good spots. And then there's like these lighter brown areas that are more clayey and less loamy. It's not like it's hard to figure out what the problem is, right? It's there. And it's just a very telling year in the garden. And as I sat there listening to sheep baa and the goats bray, they're like, me, we're goats. We need attention. The goats are really jealous of the sheep, by the way. And I was listening to the bees buzz. And I was listening to a world filled with life, looking at my garden. It just triggered that thought. Nicole, what are you preparing for? Gas prices are climbing to $4 and $5. $8 in California, I've heard. More and more people are reaching out with questions as this happens. And I get more emails like, hey, I was making it, but now I'm not sure what to do. So many questions. So much fear. Some are just feeling, well, lost. And it's a little hard to watch when I think about how we're doing this positive thing right in our community. We're building our lives. But building our lives doesn't mean it's easy one step at a time, right? And when I get emails like that, I'm talking to people who are looking at the blank spots in their garden, wondering why it didn't germinate, rather than looking at the thriving spots in their garden and saying, how can I take what I've learned from that and put it into practice over here in this blank spot? And so then that leads us back to, what are you preparing for? What are you preparing for? Do you know what you're preparing for? When you develop a deep pantry, do you know what you're preparing for? When you think, this is the number I want in my savings account, do you know what you're preparing for? When you buy 5 gallons of gas a month, do you know what you're preparing for? What are you preparing for? I'll share with you what I'm preparing for, and people in the live stream, if you want to answer that question, you totally can. This is what I'm preparing for. I'm preparing first and foremost for a stable life on the homestead, where I can teach, I can learn new things, I get enjoyment from the land, I get to invest my caring energy into something fruitful. I'm going to eat well, and I get to carve out time for fun outdoor activities like swimming, kayaking, hiking, things I enjoy doing, wild foraging. That, first and foremost, is what I'm preparing for. And when you hear that, you're like, that doesn't sound like anything crazy. I might be crazy. That's not what's making me crazy. I'm also preparing for normal life events that happen to me and my family and my friends. Job loss or income loss in my case. Right now, coffee's down a little bit. Usually this time of year, it keeps going, right? We're in the ramp up period, and it ramped up earlier this year. Well, it went down again last 2 weeks. Probably my fault. I probably haven't been talking about how I have coffee for sale and stuff at Olarosa, olarosa.com. Anyway, you guys know that anyway. So job and income loss, illness. What if I get a debilitating illness or I break an arm? Am I prepared for that? Family crisis. What if I have to fly across the country because something happens to my dad or my mom or my sister or somebody? Tornadoes. I am definitely preparing for the aftermath of tornadoes. I was never preparing for that in Oregon. I am preparing for that here. Ice storms. I prepare for ice storms. Right now, I'm a little underprepared for ice storms in the firewood department, but you'll hear me panic more and more about as we get closer to October, where it comes to a head, right? And the other thing I am preparing for right now are ongoing rolling shortages of I don't know what in our supply chain, because our supply chain is kind of messed up. Grumpy Acres Farm says, great attitude, Nicole. Preparedness turns calamities into emergencies, emergencies into problems, problems into nuisances. No fear, lions, not sheep. Yep. And Julia's sitting in a significant drought. The cable company that was laying line was digging down in some cases as much as 7 feet because the ground was dry. I don't know why they have to do that, but they have to do that. Here's what I'm not preparing for. It's important to know what you're not preparing for. I am not preparing for World War III. Not. We may even be in the middle of World War III right now. I'm still not preparing for it. I am not preparing for the U.S. to descend into a late stage fascism event or communism. Boyd says, trying to be less dependent on the system and help all the people you can while living the life. Exactly. I am not preparing for economic collapse, the economic collapse that is coming. I am not preparing for shortages of things like this ink pen or soy sauce, as I referred to earlier, for multiple years. I'm not preparing for that. I'm not preparing for a nuclear war in case World War III didn't get that across. And I'm not preparing for the FEMA camps that everybody is going to get shuffled into when the government takes over and decides that they'd rather put us in camps than have us live as we do now. Not preparing for anything like that. Martinson family is preparing to bounce to a new location and career. That's awesome. Congratulations. So then the question becomes why? Because some people come to listen to me because they find out that it kind of looks a lot like World War III out there. It kind of looks a lot like economic collapse out there. It kind of looks like multi-year shortages out there. Why is this prepper not preparing for that? Well, ask yourself this. What really happens if things get that bad? Like what realistically, historically happens if things get that bad? Can you do anything to stop it? You. No. If it gets that bad and you have 20 years of shoes in your storage area, John Willis, what happens to those shoes by 20 years from now? They degrade. So making the economic decision to store something that long that's not storable isn't going to help you out. What else happens in economic collapse? Have we seen this in our lifetime? Yes, we have. Russia went through quite a time. They went through quite a time in the 90s, 80s and 90s. Japan went through quite a time in the 80s. How long did it last? The minute we go into economic collapse, we start trying to figure out how to have an economy again. And if you're going to be prepared for that, it's not in what you store. It's in the skills you have and in your ability to build something new. And if I'm preparing for a stable life on a homestead, teaching, learning, enjoying, caring, all of those things, if I'm preparing for normal life events, if I'm preparing for ongoing rolling shortages, I'm developing the creativity and the skills I need for if there's an even bigger problem. Because bigger problems happen. It's likely one will happen in our lifetime. I think one has happened in almost everybody's lifetime. If you think it, like my grandparents went through one, my parents went through one. I haven't gone through one. Stands to reason I'm eventually going to go through one. I'm hitting it later in life. When I'm looking at lessons learned from the 70s, I'm like, I'm going to look at the lessons learned for somebody about my age in the 70s, because the 20-year-old advice is different than the 50-year-old advice, which is different than the 80-year-old advice, right? To get through times like that. The other thing is when calamity strikes, like real calamity, like nuclear war, I'm going to put that to the side because that's a whole different topic of discussion. But if economic collapse is reasonable, or if we really like formalize this World War III thing and don't have nuclear war or multi-year shortages, the answer isn't how do I get through multi-year shortages, in my opinion. It's how have I set up systems that make that hurt less? And how do I adjust my personal expectations of what my life is going to be like? And soy sauce comes to mind. It's probably why I brought the soy sauce reference up in the Self-Reliance Festival FAQ video. Soy sauce comes to mind because I source soy sauce from overseas. And if the supply chains are so messed up that for multiple years, we don't figure out how to ship containers from Japan and China and other places to the US with bottles of soy sauce, I have two choices. One, buy USA made soy sauce. And I'm sure that exists. I haven't really looked, but I'm sure it exists because you ferment soy. We grow soy. Like this is a thing we could do here. Two, stop using soy sauce. Can I live without soy sauce? I can live without soy sauce. I can actually eat well without soy sauce, right? It's not even that. I mean, I'll miss Chinese food and I'll miss that flavor, but I adjust my expectation. I stop cooking with soy sauce once I'm out of soy sauce. And eventually someday when we figure out the shipping thing again, or a local producer comes up, I have soy sauce again. And that is a thing. Okay, we got one here. I have a friend who's Russian, lived through that collapse. It was bad, no doubt. They went hungry. Yep. But now she's here, well off, and a U.S. citizen. Like the man who never sleeps says, war within arm's length. That's all we can really do. Yep. More whys. Why am I not preparing for all of that calamity? Because it will make me weaker if that calamity comes. I'm preparing for the likely things to happen and thus building strength and creativity to live through whatever happens as best I can. And if a nuke hits my house, I'm probably dead. So I'm not preparing for that at all. What I am doing, though, is developing what I call bank accounts of skills. If you think about what we do with a deep pantry, it's a food bank account, right? You're building some time in your storage where you can eat without refilling it. If you live on a homestead like I do and you live like I do, you're constantly working on the refilling it part. Sometimes you're more successful than others, but you've got that bank account of stores at all times that are just rolling through. I think that bank account of skills and creative thinking is the most important thing you can invest in right now. And you can do this with almost no money, just by learning things, by doing things, by going out when friends say, hey, I'm processing chickens, and saying, hey, can I give you a hand, right? All of these different things that you can do to build your skills and your creativity and get exposure to new ideas. I am investing in my bank account by confirming my ability to think critically. We all fall into the trap of not thinking critically from time to time. And when you do and you catch yourself, go back and ask yourself, what could I do differently? Because we need to look at things non-emotionally and critically. Where there's the big gun debate right now, where it's all emotions on both sides, pro and anti. And there is no coming to an agreement between pro and anti when it's all emotion. And I don't even know if it's necessary to come to agreement, but you can start looking at that logically, critically, and you may end up coming to a different conclusion than you originally did. It's a tough one. The thing is, and the thing I keep in mind when I'm preparing for things is I have a life to live and I need to use it well. And if I'm preparing for the zombie apocalypse, I'm hiding from the world rather than being in the world. And so when I prepare, I want all of the things I'm preparing for to involve being linked to the world, being linked to other people, existing, living, enjoying, making things better. That's what I'm preparing for. That's what I'm preparing for. So some of us get trapped in that other fear world. And I struggle sometimes to like slap you out of that, because if you're preparing for the fear, you're making crappy decisions. And if it doesn't happen, you're worse off. And if it does, you're worse off. And if you would just go back and prepare for the life you want to live, the things that are likely to happen, and sure, maybe some ongoing rolling shortages, develop your skills, figure out a way to refill without the traditional methods, you're going to be in a more stable place with that alone. If you invest in networks and relationships, if you support economically your local food suppliers, if you're not a food supplier, you're going to be first in line rather than last in line if you've made the decision to go the cheaper route and buy everything from Walmart. Either decision is valid, but what's more sustainable in the long term? What's more sustainable in the long term? Focusing on the things that are likely to happen is what sets you up to deal with the things that are catastrophic that could happen. And that's what I was thinking about in that garden. And I think something we like to focus on here in the homestead is the why. It's the why. Why is this happening? How do these systems get better? How do we make it more efficient? I think another important thing to keep in mind, though, is that not everybody wants to live like I do. And I know many of you listen to the show will never live like I do. And that you just listen to it as a reset, right? You don't have to live like I do to have the mindset that you need to get through problems. What you have to do is have clarity on the way you want to live and why you want to live that way and what that means for preparing for the likely things to happen. I mean, I think about my friend Sue Zoldak, who also has a deep pantry, but she lives in the city, and she runs an agency, and she does all of these things and has no plan to live on a homestead like I do. But she has other ways of developing that resilience into her life. And that resilience is the bank account. Building various bank accounts is the best thing you can do right now. Think about it like bank accounts, right? Like food bank accounts, supply bank accounts, like toilet paper or whatever. Skills bank accounts, those are big. Knowing how to do things is good. Relationship bank accounts, very important. The community is so important. You don't get through things alone. You can try. You don't wait and ask permission to get through things, but a lot of times you also don't get through things without somebody coming and helping you out. Community bank accounts, your actual bank account, whether that's your bank account, your little dragon pile of silver and jewelry, your crypto bank account. Ways of transacting with people is good to have multiple ones. Just throwing that out there. Regenerative bank accounts. And I put this one in here because to the extent that you set yourself up to prepare for the things that are most likely to happen, and you have a way to refill that's self-perpetuating, that doesn't require you to go buy a thing every single time to refill it, that's kind of badass. That's why the tree fodder systems that Nick Ferguson keeps talking about are so cool, because the less feed I have to buy for my animals, the better off we are if I'm having food shortages. But just overall, the better off I am, because then I don't have to go buy that. I just put a little bit of work in and my animals get food, and then I harvest the animals as needed, or milk from the animals, or whatever it is. And it's kind of a win-win-win at that point. That's what I mean by the regenerative bank accounts. Energy bank accounts. I don't know what kind of energy. I mean, the list goes on and on. When you start thinking about being prepared as having bank accounts or savings accounts, it changes your mind from panic to prepared. Panicking happens when you're not prepared. And when the panic is at the highest, people who are prepared are referred to as hoarders and evil. People who are actually prepared are the people not causing a problem when problems hit. And that's something we need to embrace. I wish the word prepper hadn't been demonized, but it is. But I'm just sharing all of this with you today because I'm hoping you'll start asking yourself, what am I preparing for? And really define it. I'm literally preparing for 3 things. Funny that it's 3, right? 1, the life I want to live. 2, normal things that happen throughout anybody's life. If you go, there's job loss, there's all sorts of stuff. 3, ongoing rolling shortages. That's it. That's what's likely to happen. And because I'm doing that, I'm way more ready for some of those more catastrophic things that they keep talking about in the news, because I've developed the creative skills. And I mean, having deep pantry helps you no matter where you are, right? So I hope this helps you out. If you like the show and the work I do here, you can support it in 2 ways. 1, get your coffee at hollowroast.com. That's water. 2, think about becoming a member. You get access to member webinars, which are pretty helpful. The one that's coming up in June is all about how to start events. That's going to be over at livingfreeintennessee.com. With that, guys, go out, make it a great week. That's the long pregnant pause I always give you before I take your questions. And I did have one come up. Boyd, you asked a question right after I had, like, somehow the timing was off. Do the bones break down when I make the bone broth, or do you have to crush them? I don't crush the bones. They do soften. When you use a pressure cooker, they'll soften up, and you could crush them up and use the bone meal on your garden. I don't do that. I actually put them out in my compost, my annual compost bins that I switch back and forth, and they break down there. So that works really well. I've heard you can feed them to animals. I have never tried them. Anyway, anything else you guys got questions about before we sign off as I share this document with my person? I mean, I'll hang out for a second. I'm just going to be quiet while you type it out, though. Two-way conversation in the Q&A. I probably should have told you at the beginning, hey, there'll be a Q&A section at the end, so put your questions in all caps like I always do, but I didn't do that this time because I'm a little flighty this week. The Self-Reliance Festival is in 5 days. 4 days. It's in 4 days. I'm going to pack up and go to Camden. It's going to be really fun. I'm actually super excited. I'm not seeing questions, so I'm going to just sign off. Guys, thanks so much for joining the live stream. Do hit that like button if you want to see more like this, and click on bell and then choose follow all if you want to be notified of future broadcasts. I hope you have a wonderful week. I will be live tomorrow at 12:30 for the Tuesday Live, First Tuesday Fireside Chat with John Willis and Jack Spirko. That is also Wednesday's podcast. And then Friday, no podcast because I'll be at Self-Reliance Festival. See you then.